Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. The Odd Couple, the Neil Simon mainstay that has a new life on television, has long had its local political doppelganger in the relationship between New York's governor and the mayor of its largest city, though neither Andrew Cuomo nor Bill de Blasio appear to be as much of a slob as Oscar Madison. But the famously acid relationship between the current governor and the mayor, which both assiduously deny exists, is far from the first or the worst between New York's top political executives. Nelson Rockefeller and John Lindsay, Hugh Carey and Abe Beame, Ed Koch and Mario Cuomo, perhaps most famously Rudy Giuliani and George Pataki, all went through headline-generating spats that provided entertainment for the political class, and the fact that the combatants came from the same party added spice to the stew. After Ed Koch lost the 1982 gubernatorial primary to Mario Cuomo, who had lost the 1977 mayoral primary to Ed Koch, the elder Cuomo observed that New York was the only state where the governor wanted to be the mayor and the mayor wanted to be the governor. At one level, it is an unequal contest. Under New York's system, Albany holds just about all the cards. The city cannot set its tax rates, its school funding formula, its rent regulations, its minimum wage scale, even the number of red light cameras without upstate approval. And governors have been known to take some spiteful glee in letting mayors dangle slowly in the wind as they toyed with their power over the city. With de Blasio and Cuomo, there are major issues at stake that affect the lives of millions of New Yorkers, though Cuomo was just forced to backtrack in the recently concluded state budget negotiations over his insistence on including in the budget an overhaul of teacher evaluations and a DREAM Act to clear the way for the children of undocumented immigrants to attend state colleges and a tax credit for contributions to parochial and private schools. Those issues, as well as rent regulations, the mayor's call to build housing on Sunnyside yards, whether and how much the city's minimum wage will rise, and whether and how long to extend mayoral control of city schools, all remain on the to-do list in a state capital marked by political infighting and intrigue. For a historical perspective and analysis of how this odd couple history is playing out today, we're joined by four New Yorkers who observe and take part in the messy reality of politics and government in New York. Vanessa Gibson brings a unique perspective as a current city councilwoman and former assemblywoman from the Bronx. Esther Fuchs is a professor of public affairs and political science and director of the Urban and Social Policy Program at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs and a Queens College graduate. And she was a senior advisor in the first term of Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Vincent Montalbano's distinguished civic career included stints as Assistant Secretary of State under Mario Cuomo, counselor to former Bronx Borough President Fernando Ferrer, and political director at New York's largest municipal union, District Council 37. And Herson Pereira, currently editor-at-large at City and State magazine and website, is a longtime prominent critic and gadfly in print and on TV and radio. Let me start with you, Vanessa. You've been in office, and you're now in office in City Hall. You've been in office in the state capitol. These tensions you've had to live with. You're trying to push a city agenda.
Right.
Does this get in the way? Is it a pain? Is it amusing?
I think it's a combination of all. It's amusing at times, but it's truly about putting priorities together. And when you look at two headstrong leaders like Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio, they're constantly butting heads because everyone wants to be in charge. Everyone wants to take credit for an idea that becomes a reality, that becomes a plan of action. And whether you look at UPK, whether you look at minimum wage, the DREAM Act, criminal justice reform, both the governor and the mayor have really been butting heads because both want to be the leaders and want to take credit for everything. So I've seen it. I served in the assembly from 2009 until 2013 when Governor Cuomo was first elected. And we started with the early budgets, and that was the focus, and ethics reform. And, Governor Cuomo runs a very tight ship. He likes things done his way or no way. And many of us learned that. And when you look at a mayor like Bill de Blasio, he came in on a reform message, running on a campaign in which there was inequity, a tale of two cities, and he really wanted to change that notion. And so a lot of the work that he needed to get done, unfortunately, requires Albany approval. And so getting that done has had its, its challenges and its hitches. But I think, the UPK for me was probably the biggest victory. Some of the other things I try to tell many of my colleagues, we cannot go to Albany and ask for 10 things and expect all 10. We have to prioritize, because the reality is you have to look at New York State. Outside of New York City, a lot of upstate counties are struggling, and they need the support too. So it's been very amusing, but I do find pride in being a part of the council and really bringing that wealth of state experience as well.
Vinny, you were up there under Mario Cuomo. You've been around city politics for an awful long time. Do substantive issues suffer in this process?
Yeah, I think that at times they suffer. This is really, as you indicated in your introduction, not much different than relationships between governors and mayors over the years. That doesn't make it something you want to see continue to happen, but it is something that happens. And the mayor is always on the back end of it, the subservient end of it. Even though New York City is the engine that drives the state, everybody knows that. Governors know that as well. It is nonetheless, that is the case. But as you can see, things get done. They may get done in a very difficult way, in a very sloppy way, but they get done at times. Certainly, I think that the mayor has had some great successes up there, notwithstanding the tension that exists between these two personalities. I mean, the daycare thing, the kindergarten stuff, was just incredible last year. But this, I want to bring a different perspective in here. I mean, I think that this goes on. It's to be expected, not fostered, but it's to be expected. But New York City is a huge entity. And while there are many things that it needs the state to do, there are many things that it can do on its own. So, for instance, last year in the battle over funding pre-K, San Francisco, over 20 years ago, a town that's only 1/10 the size of New York, used its land use power, which New York has a lot of, and the council is very much involved in that, to fund some aspects of pre-K by putting a $1 per square foot rate fee on development that needed city approval. So I'm not saying necessarily that that's
Could
something
we do that $1 fee without the approval of
Absolutely we could.
Could we?
Absolutely could, because the city has that kind of land use power. And what I'm saying is that doing some things that you can do puts you in a position when you ask for other things that maybe puts you in a better position.
You've seen this, Esther, from inside City Hall. Mayor Bloomberg probably was the mayor that had the most placid relationship with, I guess starting with Pataki, going through, well, I don't know if anybody had a placid relationship with Governor Spitzer. But you've heard me there talking about that you can get things done. Was it and Mayor Bloomberg got mayoral control of city schools, which is an issue how do you see this tension between upstate and downstate?
I mean, I think the tension itself is structural and political. There's a legal basis for it, as both of you were saying, which is, cities are stepchildren of state governments, and they really have to rely legally on the state for power over most taxation policy and a lot of other things that they would prefer not to go to the state about, even collective bargaining agreements where you think you're solving all your problems with your unions. Unions can go and make an end run around the city and get a deal at the state level. Then all of this has fiscal implications for the city. And this has been routinely part of the relationship between New York City and New York State. New York City has been a cash cow for New York State. So this kind of resentment from the mayors isn't always personal. It's really based upon the fact that it's institutional. And so what was really interesting in the first term of Mayor Bloomberg, coming off of 9/11 and a hemorrhaging of jobs out of the city, people don't really remember, but there was an economic crisis that began, I guess, in 1999, really before 2001. The city, by that point of 9/11, had lost 240,000 jobs. and there was a big hole in the budget. Rudy Giuliani had left an enormous deficit, of which Bloomberg chose not to talk about that way. And Bloomberg had ran on a platform of no new taxes. And one of the things that I was personally very proud of is I always felt that during the fiscal crisis in 1975, the city made tremendous mistakes by cutting the guts out of service delivery. The solution to the fiscal problem was essentially slash and burn. And, we reduced our municipal workforce, but there was a period, as everybody here knows, in which everything had fallen apart, and we didn't get the assistance from the state, although we got some help from you, but we didn't really get the assistance from the state, in my view, that we needed. So in this period, Bloomberg had a choice of either raising taxes or cutting services. Those are your basic two choices. And so he went to Albany to raise the property tax, and that was the largest raise in that we had in that period. He needed to lift the cap, and he was able to get support, and I think partly it was because of the crisis. When he went back to Albany for the cigarette tax, some of you may remember and still know this infamous cigarette tax, it was a stick up on the city. In order to get the cigarette tax passed, which was only going to affect New York City residents, the city had to split half the revenue with the state. That was the deal, otherwise the cigarette tax was off. So from my point of view, mayors have to go plead hat in hand to governors, and governors have historically taken great advantage of this, sometimes just for personal kicks, because they just love to talk to mayors.
Excuse me.
And also because I think, we as a city have been weak in our state legislature. We don't vote as a block in the legislature in a way that I would see was in the city's interest. The legislature gave away the commuter tax.
Yes.
Remember that? That's one of Mayor Dinkins, he can't stop talking about that still, and he's right. And who did it? Shelley Silver.
Shelley Silver, in order to try to win a seat in Rockland County that they wound up losing anyway.
Well, I think that you have to understand New York City residents, our pockets are picked continuously. That's a given. In the case of Michael Bloomberg, he's in a class by himself. There were 12 years of really independent, an independent mayor, a mayoralty, a city that was transformed. Whatever you think of, I used to call him Miguelito just to, bust his chops, just to cut him down to size. We've never had a billionaire person or an independently wealthy person like this. Whether you like it or not, he transformed. You talk about reformers. I hear the word progressive reformers. The only mayor we've had in my lifetime, Bob, I don't know about you or any of the panelists, the only reformer is really Michael Bloomberg, whether you agree with him or not. He transformed this entire city in 12 years. And if you don't believe it, take a look at the additional almost 32% new population that we have in the past 11, 12 years. So he made New York City attractive again. Again, I criticize him most of the time, except for the stuff on health that I really agree with him on the sugar ban and on the smoking, which was terrific, because whether you realize it or not, your right to smoke and be stupid about it and use sugar in excess and drink these sodas is costing us taxpayers in health costs. Having said that, Bob, the fact is that we also have a new mayor who really not very many people expected him to win the Democratic nomination, never mind the mayoralty. He comes out of nowhere, a new kid on the block. And yes, the relationship is always tense between the governor and whoever that person in the mayoralty is. It's really now with this guy who's been around forever. People don't realize he's still young, but Andrew Cuomo has been around. He knows politics. He knows how government works. He's full of himself. He thinks he's greater than God. Really, he's a nice guy on a personal level. He's a terrific father, a lousy politician. He's mean. He's aggressive. And you get Bill de Blasio out of nowhere, not an original, well, he was here, but then he went to Boston. So you have that tension coming in with this guy who really can't even get to places on time. And here is Andrew Cuomo being responsible, being an adult, doing things the way they're supposed to be done. including his own coronation in 2010. And this guy out of nowhere, there's resentment because Andrew Cuomo paid his dues. And this guy out of nowhere, from an obscure office of 36 people, public advocate, who knows the public advocate, what do they do? He went around and he ran for other offices. So that's the reality. And he comes in and he eats his candy. How does Bill de Blasio upstage the governor? He promises the voters that he's going to get universal pre-kindergarten. He doesn't just say it. He went up there. He went up with the buses of city council members. They're charging. And he kept his promise not once, twice, 3 times with all these people. And he delivered for the voters. I got to give it to him. He kept his promise. When was the last time a politician actually kept his promise? So it doesn't make look, no personal offense here, but
none taken.
But it makes the governor look bad, not intentionally, I would say. But he did what he thought he was going to do, and he forgot that Andrew Cuomo, he doesn't take lightly to that. So there's a personal thing.
But it's also what the mayor was arguing is that we should be able to make that decision on ourselves. We should be able to have a tax surcharge on our people for our kids to go to pre-K. Yeah. And the governor's ultimate solution was, I'll pay for it for the first 5 years or first 3 years. I forget exactly what it was. And I'm not going to let you control it. Just the way with the mayoral control of schools, which mayors have been trying to get for decades and decades and decades until Michael Bloomberg was able to get it. And now the mayor is saying, make me accountable for public schools. And the governor is saying, well, maybe I'll extend it for 3 years. Some of the legislatures says, well, give them at least 7 years. The mayor is saying, I run the schools, make it permanent. I mean, does this relationship get in the way of that issue?
I think it does, but, I really, there's a lot of politics and a lot of personalities that are kind of meshed into all of this. And so I always say we have to look at people before politics and principles before politics. Because a lot of times everyone comes to the table with the right mindset, but at the end of the day, the results have to be for the people. And yes, I was one of those that went to Albany because UPK was important. Yeah. We got over $300 million, which was great. But, like I said, the governor always wants to make sure that he's demonstrating leadership. And so there have been so many instances where the mayor has come out and said something, and then the governor comes out and says something. Even with controlling our own rent laws, repealing Erstat, and how we want to control that in the city. The government and the governor saying, no, well, we'll take care of it. Because to me, it always seems like there's that back and forth because the governor always wants to have control. And really, if you look at it, New York City pays out a lot more in taxes to New York State than New York State gives New York City. So for me, this is a huge issue of equity and fairness that we just have been shortchanged for many years. Minimum wage and how the governor talked about a higher wage for the city of New York, which I thought was great. But is that really possible? Do we get that through the state Senate? Not sure about that. So there are a lot of things that I think a lot of factors that are included in this conversation. But I do think the personal relationships absolutely matter. If you ask me, I would say Governor Cuomo had a better personal relationship with Michael Bloomberg than he does now with Bill de Blasio.
Well, the Andrew Cuomo that I heard Hairson describe is a little different than the one that I've known over the years. I mean, and I've known Andrew since he was 19 and was running his father's campaign for mayor in 1977. And I was active in the Cuomo campaign. The thing that I think about this particular relationship, which is hard to get around, is that the governor practices transactional politics better than anybody. He really does. I mean, everything is a transaction. I give you this, you give me that. I want this, you give me that. Now, Bill is pretty good at that too. The mayor de Blasio, is pretty good at that too. But I don't think anyone is as good at that as this governor is. So you couple that with...
And to go back to Vanessa's point, that is not a principle-driven position.
No, it's... Right.
No, it's not.
I'm not going to say that the governor is without principle, but I am certainly going to say that transaction trumps just about everything else. I mean, look at the budget negotiations that we just went through, okay? Right. There was all of these things that he said absolutely he was had to have and was going to get, okay? And actually, this governor, in that mold that he exists in, could have gotten them. And he got a lot less and a lot of things that were different than what he said he was going to get. The mayor it does come from a different position, a more philosophical position. And so he's
more ideological.
How about ideological?
Right.
Ideological. All right, and I'm softening it. Ideological, if we want to say that. You're right. He's got an ideology, and I'm not sure how the governor would explain his ideology, frankly. But the governor has the power, and that is not new. You know, you talked about a number of governors. I mean, we left out Hugh Carey, who actually ran people for mayor against A-Beam. Right. I mean, that's where Mario Cuomo became.
But he had a good reason to do that.
Yeah. Well, he did, because the fiscal crisis intervened, and practically everybody in our audience has existed after that point. But nonetheless,
but this is history. You should. Right.
but nonetheless, that's what the relationships. And just to finish off my comment, I think where the mayor perhaps made a bit of a mistake in early on was not just
Don't use early with the mayor, because he's never...
Okay, that's true. Early on in his term was not just to bring stuff up and say, you know, this is what I need, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to get. But he did something which I thought was very unusual for a mayor to do with a governor, but particularly with a transactional governor, is he got involved in the gubernatorial race and the legislative races to some degree. And that is, there's a big difference. Mario Cuomo used to say you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose.
You govern in prose.
You know, you governing in prose means you remove yourself from that. You have a lot of people, the mayor has a lot of people who are very skilled in terms of politics, and they were doing things and he should have let them do it. He got himself out front. So not only did he create a problem with the governor, he created a problem with the Senate, where he supported Democrats to retake the Senate, and the Republicans took the Senate. So
just to finish one point, and then I want to come to you, is part of his involvement in politics last year was to pull Andrew Cuomo's chestnuts out of the fire with the Working Families Party. So, I mean, he put himself out on the line in order to keep Zephyr Teachout from getting that Working Families Party endorsement.
And a normal politician would see it that way. Andrew Cuomo did not see it that way. Because he had to make a speech before them. He had to really?
I mean, arguably, he would not have gotten that nomination absent Zephyr.
That's true, but he wanted the nomination without having to go through, especially something that the mayor had to help him with.
Yeah, that's a no-no.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that Mayor de Blasio did that really, you know, was in Andrew Cuomo's face was mobilizing the public the way he did on UPK against...
On universal pre-K.
Universal pre-K, against the governor. Instead of doing what you called so beautifully transactional politics, instead of going up and having the meetings with him, he's a grandstander. He has to get up and do his speech and make the pitch and, you know, not do the deal that Andrew Cuomo is used to having people do with him. And, you know, he really embarrassed the governor. He almost made the governor look bad, I think, in that. And the truth is that there was no support for this millionaire's tax in the public opinion polls. Most people don't care that other people are rich. It doesn't really bother them that much in New York. They don't want to see their taxes go up. They wanted to see it get funded. And yet after the governor put on the table the money, he was still up there screaming about the tax. Not walking away like a gentleman, taking his victory
thank you.
And saying thank you. And saying thank you. So to me that was actually very surprising, and you couple that with the campaigning that he did against the incumbents in the state Senate. It's, you know, you're really missing the boat on Albany politics. The legislature is very important, and you have to understand you don't have a block of voters there.
Let me as you're going to talk about this, because you are the political expert here, how much of this was de Blasio, whose background is as an operative?
An organizer, a politician. This guy, he was still, you know, lately, the last 2 months, I've seen some kind of transitional phase going on, and you can see the shifting in some of the administration from Peter Ragone and some other people being moved around, and they're still leaving, that he went from actual campaign mode, which he was all of the 4 years as public advocate, and he went into a whole campaign. You know what I'm saying? There was a point in June in 2013, he was at 9 percentage points in the polls. Everybody expected Christine Quinn to be the person, so he kept campaigning. It's worked for him. So he's got to realize that now he's governing. I think that the governor couldn't accept the fact that this person
that he needed de Blasio.
He needed de Blasio. Well, and I'm going to tell you something. It didn't look very good for the governor when he got 51% in a re-election against an unknown who got 41%, a Republican. If he's that good.
And that's why I'm saying that he subconsciously, or maybe consciously, but not letting on, he resented that.
But that wasn't de Blasio's doing.
No. The governor resented the fact that de Blasio had to help him out of a hole, and he did. You know, the mayor did. He came through. But if I was giving advice to the mayor, I would have still given the help that was necessary, but not so much out front. Because you're right, as an operative, sometimes he gets ahead of his own stature.
Let me ask you, Esther, looking back through history, I mean, you know, if you want to, you know, we were talking before the show, you go back to Jimmy Walker and Franklin Roosevelt when he was governor and was run out of the governor's office. I mean, there's a historic resonance in these kinds of struggles.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite one is really John Lindsay and Nelson Rockefeller, both who were, you know, long-term elected officials, Lindsay as mayor and Rockefeller as governor, and both who had national ambitions.
And both progressive Republicans.
Yes, right. And then Lindsay becomes a Democrat in the course of his career. But there were two examples that I pulled out because this whole idea of this I found really fascinating. You really hit on something, I think, very important.
This odd couple.
Yes, this odd couple thing. 68. Go back to 1968. We actually had a garbage strike in New York City. And see, things could always be worse. You could have garbage all over the street. And the governor actually took state control over the city sanitation department, and in this period, completely embarrassing the mayor in this period, and saying that Lindsay couldn't resolve the strike. And then he resolved the strike by essentially caving to all the union demands, which is what Lindsay was trying to avoid then in terms of this. And then my favorite is, of course, another subway fare hike. So you'll like this. In 1970, they were trying to, I guess it was Lindsay, was trying to cap the subway fare at 25 cents. I wish we could do that today.
I know.
Right?
But
trying to cap the so this was a fight. It was over a nickel. And Rockefeller went in and raised the subway fare, the transit fare, to 30 cents. And this was considered a huge betrayal of the mayor and of the city. And he basically derided the mayor, and they basically saw each other as incompetents for the whole time that they had to work together. And, you know, I don't think Lindsay ever really recovered from the Rockefeller assault.
Well, Lindsay lost the Republican nomination the next.
Let me just say this for this young audience that we have here, these young people. Yes, politicians have always been that petty. They acted like school children. They acted like they were in pre-K and in first grade. We actually saw that, so don't think this is anything new. And by the way, so that you didn't think it was a Freudian slip or a slip of the tongue, we did have progressive Republicans in this city. Right. They did exist. We actually lived them.
True.
Yes, and we called them Rockefeller Republicans.
Rockefeller Republicans, that's right.
Oh, wow.
And there was Jacob Javits.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, one of the most progressive Republicans ever in the Senate.
And Kenneth Keating was a reasonably progressive
So
Republican.
there is still hope for the grand old party of all white men. So.
What are the implications now, right now, on the civic agenda, on the state agenda, now that we're past the budget, we still have mayoral control of schools. We still have the minimum wage, whether there's going to be, where the city wants to raise the minimum wage higher, and the governor says, we're not going to raise it as high, but I'm going to let you have a $1 higher minimum wage within the city than it is within the rest of the state. And now some suburban counties are saying, what about us? We want that higher wage at all. Rent regulations, which you brought up, which is so incredibly and critically important, not only to the city and to the people who live here, but to the mayor's affordable housing commitments. So this budget is not the end of this issue agenda going on right now.
Absolutely not. So the members will have 2 weeks off in April for the Passover holiday, Easter holiday, and then that's when the fun begins. That's when all of the legislation. Let me tell you, while we don't have a quota, and there is no quota in the legislature, but there's an estimated 2,000 bills that pass the state assembly and Senate every year. And right now, the beginning of April, the legislature is not even at 1,000, I assure you. So in April and May and early June, they will do an influx of just speed race bills passing the legislature. But again, a lot of the big button issues like rent reform, minimum wage, the DREAM Act, which is something many of us care about, are a lot of issues that will have to get tackled. Now, many of them have sunsets. Mayoral control has a sunset of June 30th, and so does rent reform. So they have to pass. If that sunset happens, that means that the law no longer is on the books and we would have to do extensions. We have been in that scenario with rent reform where we have allowed the laws to expire and we've done extenders because there was no agreement. And these are very big issues. I believe personally there's a reason why the DREAM Act was not in the budget. And I think the governor has a lot to do with that. But it's still a topic that many people care about in Albany and many of us care about. So these are issues that are going to be worked out. And again, it's a negotiating thing. So it's like the transactional. It's what do you want in the state Senate? What do you want in the assembly? How do we put that together and find common ground? And that's how you get things done.
And understand that the budget that has been reported as being on time, as passed, really wasn't a full budget.
Correct.
It's really a lie. It's a con job. The media reports it as such. There isn't a full budget. Am I right or not? There is no full budget approved. So they went through a little maneuvering that the governor has at his disposal because we still don't talk. And Esther, you know about this, and most of you do also. There needs to be a constitutional convention that changes our state laws. They're doing everything they do legally, but it's a con job. And it's not the first governor that does it. There's a needs assessment that he has. He passed it's 25% of the budget. Is that correct? 25% of the budget was approved. 75% of the budget is still unresolved. So this is really, when you talk about personalities, quite frankly, I understand what we're discussing. I could care less about the personality because it's just one guy and another guy, because it's always guys, by the way, and most of the time they're white. So I could care less because it's not representative. There's no person of color that have sat in the room. Now we have Carl Hasty in the room who made it a little bit difficult. This is the first black person to actually sit inside with this three, usually white man. So there is a racial component to this that people don't talk about. It's uncomfortable to talk about. But basically, these disruptors of the state government and people who actually talk about it, it's not because they have the interests of the electorate or the people that they work for. They forget. When they say Bill de Blasio got this money and Governor Cuomo got this money, put any governor. It's not their money. It's your money. It's our money. They talk about like, oh, I gave you $300 million. You didn't give us anything. It's the taxpayers' money. So there's a little things in civics, and we just perpetuate this falsehood about who it is that's really in power.
Well, let's talk about this, to follow up on this transactional question. What the governor tried to do in the budget was embed things that really should not have been in the budget.
Right.
And there was one for the left and one for the right. Tax credits for private, parochial, and charter schools. Right. And
the DREAM Act.
And I forget what was on the the DREAM Act.
DREAM Act.
Both have pulled out. Is that because transactional politics didn't work?
Well, I'm not sure that it's that transactional politics doesn't work. In fact, maybe you could say it did work, because what happened is the other side made a transaction that said to the governor, you need a budget because remember,
totally work.
To the governor, the main thing he wanted was to have a budget on April 1st, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. And that's important. That is important. But I have to say, I'm glad to hear you saying what you're saying here, son. I agree with you 100% that politics has become too much about personalities and not nearly enough anymore about principle, about substance, about success.
How much of that is the fault of my old job in the media?
You know what? It's
all your fault.
It's not. It's
his fault.
It's your fault. No, I think that certainly we've all talked about how the 24-hour news cycle has contributed to this, because you just have to have a story. And what's the easiest story? The easiest story is he said, she said, they said. Okay?
Personality.
So yes, absolutely, that's the case. I think though several things that I think first of all, it caters to pop. Look, we all have egos. All of us do. Those of us are on the stage.
Not
politicians do.
Does, yes.
Okay. This caters to a politician's ego, and so it is not necessarily in the case of those who are at the top of the hierarchy. It's not necessarily in their interest to not have themselves talked about in this context. That's why I always have believed that the real work gets done to a great degree at the legislative level, both at the state legislative level and the city council level. But at the top of the pyramid, that certainly is the case. We're all responsible for that. But I'm going to get back to the thing I originally said before. This mayor, any mayor, and you're right to a degree about Michael Bloomberg, and he was not one of my favorite mayors. I'm not big on plutocrats holding public office, but that's okay. He was there and he did some good things. But I think that what needs to be done is a political figure, a political leader needs to use the power they have and not complain so much about the power they don't have, because there's always power you don't have, but use the power you do have. And there's a lot. I mean, I could go through a whole list of it. I'm not going to do it. That thing about San Francisco impressed me for years, because the daycare workers were one of my clients for many years. And I'm saying San Francisco, 700,000 people, 1/10 the size of what New York was. Now it's even less than 1/10 the size of New York. Raising $10 million on commercial development. Do you know how much commercial development we have in this city in a given year? How much more we could raise? And there's other things as well. On the minimum wage, for instance, any mayor, any mayor, could use their contracting power to set a living wage, a prevailing wage, for the contracts they give out.
Well, in fact, the governor has done that.
Blasio did that.
And the governor has done it with the Port Authority.
Blasio has done that with his contracting power. He's already raised the minimum wage for anybody doing business with the city. So he's done that.
And the governor did it on airport contractors.
On airport contractors.
Right. I completely agree with you about the mayor having all this capacity to do so much. I mean, cities have to balance their budget at the end of the fiscal year, and we always have a sort of make-believe balanced budget. If you really looked at the budget and you wanted to completely fund childcare, completely fund UPK, completely fund parks, completely fund libraries, completely fund service for seniors, I mean, you could go on and on. They're not. When I was at City Hall and I did the after-school reorganization, and basically 20% of the kids who could have been in after-school programs were getting after-school programs. But we had a balanced budget at the end of the fiscal year. It doesn't mean that there's a lot of room to find resources or find money. And I think the idea that somehow there are lots of taxes that can be levied, the truth is we are the highest tax jurisdiction in the nation at this point. And I think, businesses do leave. They have left. Yes. We did have a fiscal crisis in 1975 here, and, there is Detroit out there for everybody to look at and remember that what we're going
and there's also San Francisco's.
Yeah, but
for every Detroit, there's a San Francisco.
No, there isn't. Most cities are not like New York. I mean, we actually have had an extraordinary renaissance here, and I would suggest, I agree with with Gerson, it's partly because of Michael Bloomberg's ability to transform the economy, to create diversity in our economy. We created a high-tech sector in New York City when there was, everybody said, tech never going to go to cities, only Silicon Valley. There was no tech in cities. And now New York is the center of tech on the East Coast and really competing with Silicon Valley. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Part of my concern is what happens after we accepted these 12 years of this major transformation in New York City. What does Mayor de Blasio, not him personally, but as mayor, his responsibility to the future of the city, to the additional 30-odd% that were attracted here? How do we keep those people? How do we keep attracting people? Because this city has to keep... Look, I'm not a fan of Miguelito. I wasn't. I criticize him, but it's undeniable that he did accomplish this. There was a transformation.
But he also left with absolutely no municipal union contracts. I mean, zero.
Well, okay, but that's...
They didn't want to do a contract with him. Come on, let's get real here. Moreover, there's a $3 billion surplus for the next 3 years. This is the first... Mayor Dinkins, what he could have done if he had a surplus, you know, we talk about this all the time. He was completely screwed. He, you know,
right after the 87 crash.
That's right. But he's got 3 years of surpluses. Where is he putting this money now? Is he investing it in infrastructure? Is he keeping the subway fare down? I don't know. Maybe you can help me out.
Well, look, it's just I think that we have all accepted what I consider a myth, and the Bloomberg administration, the Bloomberg tenure, is the proof of it. We've accepted this myth that you cannot, in any way, shape, or form, ask the folks who make money in the city and off of the city to contribute. Now, I'm not talking about individuals and income tax. Let's leave that completely aside. That's a whole other thing. But does anyone really think that if I own a piece of commercial property or a commercial building and I'm going to make $100 million off of that if somebody says, no, we want to do something like they did in San Francisco and you'll make $95 million off of it, that person's going to say, oh no, I'm not going to develop it. I'm going to take my property and I'm going to move it to New Jersey.
Millions of
How
dollars,
do you do that?
But I think that
How
these
do you
people,
do that?
that's in absence of the fact that you cannot have anyone, and no matter how much money they make, to be throwing away their millions on some fool who doesn't know where he's taking the city. Do you understand that?
All right, let me...
I'm not sure I agree with
But
that.
that's like
Okay,
a straw.
well, that's my opinion. I'm just saying you have to show that you have a plan.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, and if you don't have that plan, people don't want to throw their money away. I don't care how much money you do have.
Let me try to take some...
We could restructure taxes, there's no question, but you need Albany to restructure most taxes. You really do. And there's no question that we should be restructuring taxes, because that wasn't my point. But businesses can leave. They can.
Yes.
Real estate.
Not ones that have real
Let
estate.
me tell us your name and your campus, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is LED, and I'm from John Jay College. My question is, well, there have been many attempts over the years from various parts of New York, most notably New York City, to succeed. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on this and how it would affect the city or the state.
Say it again. On what?
To secede.
Secede.
The question of seceding.
That's so funny that you said this, because I wrote a little note to myself. The 51st state, Jimmy Breslin.
1969.
Remember?
As the
Norman
only
Bailey
Staten
running for
Islander,
mayor.
should I have a comment on that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Staten Island.
You'll be the 52nd
Staten
state.
Island did want to secede. Not a good idea. Not a good idea for New York. New York could not be a state in and of itself. Not a good idea for New York City. I'm sorry, could not be a state.
Why not?
No,
They
it could
could.
not. No,
Absolutely.
Just for the sake of argument, why
it
not?
could
Why is you like you? No, it can't happen.
Because there
are states smaller.
Yes, because the diversity of, as much as we do for the rest of the state, there are some things that they do for us too. And the diversity of the state in terms of, well, yes, they do, by the way. And by the way, on Staten Island, we were talking about seceding, and they said, well, you
mean
not
to
going to
tell
be
me
able
that
to
we
keep the
couldn't
garbage
run
down.
our own hospital system without the state?
Yeah.
We
It's
couldn't
much
run
more than
our own.
we just had a
But tell me why not?
I'm going to tell you, we just had a discussion in which I was told, and I'm not even saying that we could have a big enough tax base to exist as a state, but I was told we don't even have a big enough tax base for us to fund our own priorities now. So now you want to be a state? I don't think that works out.
Well,
New York City?
New York City.
We don't
$11 billion every year. We have a balance of payment
But
deficit.
we're talking about the fact that we're asking the state to do stuff for us.
Well, we're asking
young lady,
because
So
you had a
are
great
we going to ask
question.
them to
They
do
took
stuff
our
when we're
money.
our own
Why
state?
are we asking the state to do stuff? Because they took our tax dollars.
You see, the
We
question,
controlled the tax dollars.
the question posed by this young lady, you're not hearing it. And she may lead the way along with other students who will say, you know what? We're tired of giving too much money for education, not getting it back. Campaign for fiscal equity.
Yeah.
How many billions are they owed to us?
The total was $5 billion, and we're still owed almost
So I think we could run a school system with that.
$2.7 billion.
well, all right, let me,
I beg for mayoral
of course,
control.
having
Young people go.
secede, having been...
Bob, you got more than you bargained for.
having been raised in Brooklyn, in 1898 we had the municipal incorporation where the boroughs came together in the city. In Brooklyn, it's still called the Great Mistake. So,
My name is Raymond Renaleta. I'm from Brooklyn College. My question, as I listen to everyone speak about the city and the state, I can't help but think how both have failed the people in spectacular fashion. So what I would like to know is how can the community groups, the neighborhood groups, take back the power to start making both the state and the city work together to serve, to fixing our problems and putting their egos aside that were alluded to earlier?
who wants to tackle? I mean, the point of the matter is that we do manage to get from today to tomorrow. I mean, you were making the point that despite all the, the wonderful show business, and I was a reporter for many years. I loved the show business quality.
Get rid of the political parties. Independent registration. I would do nonpartisan elections. That's what I would do. So you're asking me?
Nonpartisan elections and nonpartisan partisan
if
elections.
you start eliminating the party structures, which perpetuates itself, parties throughout in any part of the world, including the United States, Democrats and Republicans. That's why we have this. It's your turn now. It's our turn now. It's our.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I mean,
just get rid of the political party, nonpartisan elections. That's another thing that I favor that Michael Bloomberg tried to do.
No, just a quick point, which is...
Actually, he was in every party, so he was.
Yes.
Well, and he still couldn't find the right
and he
party.
tried to own one of them.
Right.
Really, you would be amazed at the decline in voting in this city.
Yeah.
And so while I'm a big supporter of community organizations, what I think is community organizations have to mobilize people to vote. And this mayor won with a very, very low turnout. He had a very big mandate among the people who turned out, but you do the calculations, we have less, it's like a 30% turnout in the last mayoral race. 30% of eligible voters. That doesn't mean the people who didn't even register. And so if you truly want change, you need to be an activist, certainly, but it makes a difference who wins elections. It makes a difference in New York. It makes a difference in Washington. And we are not registering to vote, and we are not voting. And this is a critical piece of the puzzle in a democracy.
Yeah.
You have to minimally...
So I also call it voter education, because a lot of people don't understand the power of voting and why we vote in the first place. They don't know the historical perspective. I say the generation 40 and under needs to be educated in voting. Even when you look at census data and the fact that we get federal funds based on those numbers, it's based on voting. And many people are not a part of that. So there has been a grassroots movement. There's been, demonstrations, community groups around an assortment of issues. But in order to effectuate change, you have to change the people who are in office. And a lot of folks, even some of my older residents, I have to educate sometimes because they only vote in presidential races. I'm like, well, what about all the local officials? Like, it's great to have a President Obama in office, but it's even more important to have leaders in the mayor's office and the governor's office and the city council. Those are the ones that drive land use and funding and resources so that New Yorkers can live. federal government is great, but local government is even more important. So voter education for me.
And, of course, as we grew up in Brooklyn, we always believed in voting early and often.
Yes. Oh, yes, early voting. Yes, I like early voting.
And often.
The Meade principle.
Hi, I'm Cassie Rocha. I'm from John Jay College. My question is, would New York City be more liberal than it already is if it were not part of New York State?
Well, that's an interesting.
There's a lot of conservative people in New York City that I'm telling you, you would be surprised and shocked. A lot of, and think of New York City, not just Manhattan, but think of Queens, the outer boroughs, think of Brooklyn. No, terrible. Staten Island, and even in the Bronx.
Of course.
In the Bronx, I'll give you an example. People think and talk about liberal New York and this and that. There's a guy named Ruben Diaz who happens to be also a reverend.
Senior.
Senior.
Senior, yeah.
And, a religious freak, okay, an extremist. He gets elected and reelected, and not by small margins. Who do you think is electing him?
As a Democrat.
As a Democrat.
That's right.
Right-winger. Right here in New York City, in your borough.
Yep, he's one of my 3 state senators.
There you go. So don't think that there's no, this is liberal city like as you think. And the fact remains that, go back to the voting question and how would you get people participate. You cannot have the dominance of one party dictate in primaries who the best candidate is.
Well, and arguably,
by a process.
Right.
Well, but what I'm saying.
But arguably, both of our Republican mayors, both Giuliani, it's hard to remember, back to 1993 when Giuliani was elected. Giuliani was a progressive Republican when he ran. He was not the right-wing cartoon that he has turned himself into to his eternal damnation, if you will. But and Michael Bloomberg was a Republican as a matter of convenience because he needed to pick a party.
But if you think about it, because New York City is heavily Democratic-led, Democratic registered voters, for many of us, when we run for election, our election is our primary in September. So after we win our primary, we do very little campaigning, and in November, you know what happens? We win by 95% of the vote. But outside New York City, it's different. You have legislators that have a tough primary in September and then an equally as tough general election in November. And that doesn't happen in New York City because everything is driven on parties.
Let me just say about Michael Bloomberg. Understand that he was an executive, a business person who actually saw that he needed to make an investment in the city that he wanted a future for. That's why he got into politics. I understand all this. He wasn't a politician. He's still not a politician. He was a businessman who saw New York City as the $75
million in election.
He could. It was his money.
What? I could tell you why. He got
that's the
into
problem
politics.
is that it was his money.
Okay, but the people.
Yes.
I worked on his campaign, and I didn't have to because I'm a professor, and I did that by choice. Because when I met him, and I went completely agnostic. I didn't know who he was, and I said, "What makes you think you can be mayor?" I mean, I was like totally blown away that this guy thought he was going to run for mayor. And he
Did you call him arrogant?
He said, no, at that time, he wasn't, frankly. Not to me. I mean, because I didn't.
Well, go ahead.
I didn't care, And he said to me, I believe every child in New York City deserves a quality education. It's all broken. He's an engineer, and he saw things in the city as broken. And he thought he could go in and fix it. And his big issue, and you can disagree with what he did with the education system or not, but his big issue was every child in New York City deserves a quality education. That's what sold me.
Let me try to get another question in.
Hi, my name is Mayrani Duran. I'm from Brooklyn College, and my question is, would Cuomo be hindered or helped in his political aspirations if de Blasio pulls him to the left?
Well, that's a very interesting question.
You would need trucks and trains and horses to pull Andrew Cuomo, the Andrew Cuomo of today that you saw, know him, to pull him to the left. He can't even get him to the middle.
Well, it also, I think that implicit or inherent in that question is, what is Andrew Cuomo's future? And I think part of the agitation that we're seeing now is that Andrew doesn't see a future for himself beyond, let's say, running for governor again. But if he thinks he's going to be president, that's just not going to happen. So whether he's pulled to the left or the right, what he probably should do is think about the best way of being the best governor.
He's much more of a pragmatic as opposed to an ideological governor, though.
He is. He's a transactional.
He has gotten a lot done. I mean,
He is. He's completely practical.
Cuomo's really gotten a lot done. I mean, you have to put that on the table.
Quite frankly, I don't know what the future is. There's a guy
closed prisons upstate. You should notice that.
There's a guy named Preet Bharara walking around, indicting people. I don't know what's going to happen. So I don't know who has a future in Albany or not.
Good point.
Is he maintains control. I was in the legislature when he closed the prisons, and his idea was economic engines in upstate New York should not be predicated by the prison system. And closing
Which is
these
what
jails,
it was. It was essentially a jobs program.
Legislators upstate, that I always say represented more farmland than people, they wanted to keep their jails open because those were jobs. So the governor said, we're going to close them, and instead we're going to create economic engines through CUNY, through using other amenities that New York State has. What a lot of people don't realize in New York State, the greatest economic engine in New York State is agriculture. Not New York City, not tourism, but agriculture in the state.
Yes, sir. Let's get a last question in.
Hello, my name is Monero Graville, and I attend John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And my question is, in addition to honoring its commitments for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, are there any actions the state could take to give back to New York City, considering how much more New York City gives back to New York State?
Well, when we talk about giving back to New York State, I mean, we are part of the state. So, I mean, we give and we get. I mean, to some degree, I always thought it made sense because we do generate so much wealth, and we do tax that wealth that it's not inappropriate for us to kick more money upstate than it is that we get back.
But the state should be funding mass transit and infrastructure. See, that is what states and the national government should be doing. And we have a huge capital deficit in the MTA.
15
million. 15 million.
Don't we still pay a portion of Medicaid as well?
And we are the only
city
that pays.
They could take over
Medicaid
that's been
welfare.
talked about since Mario Cuomo.
I don't know how you keep pumping money into a system. The MTA keeps losing money. They wind up making money. At one point they had two sets of books. I remember talking to then. You remember that when they had two sets of books? I remember talking to then Elliot Spitz as Attorney General when he won. I said, just disband it. MTA disbanded.
I got the goodbye sign. I always
too many structures we have that don't work.
Make deadline, and I want to thank you all for joining us at CUNY Forum, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.